A lot of decks, including water decks, got a boost with the release of Dominus Impulse. This trap card has the effect that says you can activate this trap card when a card or effect is activated that includes an effect that special summons a monster. Negate that effect. Then, if you have a trap card in your graveyard, destroy that card. This is basically Tearlament Royal Kalos, if it were a hand trap. And the best thing about this card is that you can activate it from your hand, but you cannot activate the effects of Light, Earth, and Wind monsters for the rest of the duel. This can hurt you if you're running Light, Earth, or Wind hand traps, like Effect Veiler, Maxi, and Drolan Lockbird. But because Dominus Impulse only locks you after it resolves, you just have to activate these trap cards before resolving Dominus Impulse. The problem is, after Dominus Impulse resolves, you still run the risk of drawing bricked hand traps later in the game. Some people might drop all Light, Earth, and Wind monsters to avoid bricks. This can be a mistake, because hand traps like Maxi and Droll are just so powerful, they can win games by themselves, and there aren't that many good Dark Fire Water hand trap substitutes for these cards. So because Dominus Impulse locks you out of activating Light, Earth, and Wind, I'm going to call it short LEW, monster effects for the rest of the duel, we want to know what is the probability of drawing a dead card based on the amount of LEDW hand traps we have in our deck, so we can factor the risk when deck building. So first we need to know our deck size of 40 cards, we need to know the amount of impulse we have, which is 3, and our opening hand size, which is 5, and the remaining deck size, which is 35. And the percent of drawing 1 impulse in this deck is 1 out of 3 or 33%. We need to find the probability of then drawing an LEW that next turn, and that gives us about 50% if you have 20 LEW hand traps. 25% if you have 10. I mean, if you can imagine a 40 card size deck and half of them are LEWs, then you should expect about 50% to be LEWs that you're going to draw that next turn. And so we want to multiply the probability of drawing an impulse with the probability of drawing an LEW next turn. And that gives us the probability of drawing a dead LEW. You're only drawing a dead LEW if you're drawing a LEW next turn and you activated that impulse. So this assumes that you activated an impulse after drawing it. And so when you multiply these two together, and if you guys are good at Algebra 2, 1/2 multiplied by 1/3 is 1 out of 6, or 16.88%. 16.88% if you have 20 LEW hand traps. Typically you might have a lot less than this, about 10 or maybe less of Droll, Veiler, and Maxis, and so you're probably going to be down here somewhere. And if we look at these numbers, 8% of probability of drawing a dead LEW is still kind of high. If you can imagine for a second something like Psyframe Driver, a hand trap like Psyframe Gamma requires Driver as a brick in your deck, the probability of drawing that Gamma or that Driver that following turn out of 35 cards is 2.86%. This means the probability of drawing a bricked Psyframe Driver is 3 times lower than having 10 LEWs in your deck. If you were to lower the amount of hand traps you have down to something more comparable to bricking on a Psyframe Driver, you're going to get down here to 3 or 4 LEW hand traps. But this is a bit misleading. I want to show you guys that the probability is actually a little bit lower, because the probability of drawing a bricked hand is lower when you take into account that about half your games don't even make it to your next turn, the turn you would draw a bricked card. The probability of drawing an LEW cut in half is your expected probability of drawing a dead LEW. So you're probably going to be somewhere down here. If you have 9 hand traps, you'd be about 3.8%, or about 1 out of 25 games is when you're actually expected to draw a dead LEW. After, like, let's say 100 matches, 4 of those ranked matches, you're drawing that LEW, which isn't as significant as you would expect. And this is also a bit misleading as well, because you can cut this in half. Again, this is because Dominus Impulse doesn't lock if you set it on the field. If you're playing a deck like Marincess, Aqua Angel can let us look at the opponent's hand, check for Duster to see if it's safe to set Dominus Impulse on the field. And then you also have the link for Marincess Argonaut, which can negate your opponent's spell and traps, protecting your back row. This means going first or about half your games, it won't hurt to draw Impulse. So if you multiply that expected probability of drawing a dead LEW cut in half is your actual percentage of drawing an LEW and Marincess or any deck that can set your Dominus Impulse. And you can see here that we have all these different probabilities. If you have 9 light earth or wind hand traps, that's about 1.9% or 2%. That's 2 out of 100 games or 1 out of 50. Not very significant. My Marincess deck runs 3 Impulse, 3 Imperm, and 3 Ash that don't conflict with Impulse, then fills the 9 hand trap space I have left with 3 Veiler, 3 Droll, 2 Maxi, and 1 Ghost Ogre. With the expected probability of drawing a bricked hand trap 1 out of 50 games, I can feel safe to run these powerful hand traps. So have I convinced you to keep running these hand traps? Let me know.